Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Top 10 edition of Magic Mike's, proudly sponsored by our Patreon supporters and CoolStuffInc.com, where you can find cool stuff in stock every day. Visit CoolStuffInc.com and use promo code MagicMikes to save 5% off anything in the store. Singles, sealed, supplies, whatever you want, get 5% off by using the promo code MagicMikes. And check out our co-sponsor, Mana Traders, the best tool to enhance your Magic Online experience. Use the code MagicMikes_8N4. 8 November 4 for 10% off your next subscription with Mana Traders. My name is Evan Irwin, and we get started each week by saying hello to my two co-hosts, Power Dragon.
Man, I'm already like 10 feet deep in the rabbit hole of Bloomburrow, and I haven't had time to deal with fantasy football stuff yet. This set is engulfing my life, and it's fun.
Are you in the rabbit hole? Did we really do the rabbit hole joke right there?
Mm-hmm. I did. I did indeed.
Ruben, Wrestler.
We've got a lot more puns to dig into in this set. I really love the flavor of this set, the world building that they've done. They made it cute, but not overly cute. Like there's a little bit of, we're pretty much where Redwall is, not quite to Watership Down, but it's not just cute. There's some dangerous stuff.
And scary stuff, depending on, well, where you look at it. Now, we also begin with our choice for the top comment from the last top 10, and actually it's a top 5, in a segment we call Honorable Mention, where Ruben will tell us who was the most eloquent in letting us know what card we did not choose as one of our top 5 Assassin's Creed cards. Ruben?
Well, I decided to go with Flyboy245's comment, not deep enough into Assassin's Creed to have an input on what should have been in the top 5, but as someone who's Greek, I'm super excited to see Cleopatra printed in Greek. Serialized, I know, but still cool. I'm planning on building a Legends deck with her.
Yeah, very nice. Cleopatra Exiled Pharaoh is a mythic in the set. It's a green, black, and 2 generic mana for a 2/4 legendary human noble with allies. At the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 other target legendary creatures, and also has Betrayal of whenever a legendary creature with counters on it dies. Draw a card for each counter on it. You lose 2 life. And if you do try hard enough, there is the Greek serialized version, which will, I'm sure, run you a pretty penny.
Yeah.
Oh, no doubt.
I haven't seen that one, but
it's on the screen.
Several hundred, if not $1,000, probably into that silly thing.
Yeah, generally the serialized are like what? Kind of the floor is like 100, 150-ish.
Yeah.
Depending on what
and
you're
if they're
looking at.
more rare or playable, you get several multiple, depending on what it is.
Yeah.
I know that my roommate has a Griswold the Dreadsower deck. That he's planning on putting Cleopatra in, just in case they ever kill his Griswold. He can draw 20 cards, which is hilarious. So, yeah, like a black-green Legends Matter kind of decks with either Kethis as the commander or something like that would be awesome.
Yeah, it would be nice to get this on Arena. It sure would be. Wizards, thanks. Appreciate that. But with that said, we do appreciate Flyboy245 being a part of the show. Stay tuned for our top 10 list this week and let us know what your choice of honorable mention may be. So let's go ahead and get started. We don't have a lot of overlap, which is nice. I think there's only one from each of us that happens to cross over in the other person's list. So let's get started here with number 10. Ruben, what's your number 10?
My number 10 is a card type that I wasn't expecting them to bring back, which is Class. The last time that we saw Class was for the Dungeons and Dragons themed sets. We had like Wizard Class and Bard Class and stuff like that. And now we have the talents that are sort of similar, not exactly the same, but functionally the same. And they are enchantment classes. And the one that I'm most excited for, I think, is Caretaker's Talent, which is a rare class for 2 generic and a white. It says, whenever one or more tokens you control enter, draw a card. This ability triggers only once each turn. Level 2, for just a white mana, when the class becomes level 2, you create a token that's a copy of target token you control. And then, at the top end, for 4 mana, you pay it, and then creature tokens you control get +2/+2. This is kind of doing everything that you want in any sort of tokens deck, whether you're making specific tokens in like a Gear Red commander deck, or just lots of tokens going wide, like in a Teysa style deck. Being able to create a copy of a token that perhaps is gigantic at level 2, making all of your tokens gigantic at level 3, which allows your 1/1s and your bats and your rabbits to tangle with the best of them. And oh, by the way, say level 1 is just like your classic, welcoming vampire, Takasia's welcome style thing that triggers off of any token, be it a food, a treasure, a 1/1, whatever and what have you. So I'm really excited about Caretaker's talent. I think that this one is the most solid at all 3 levels.
I like the talents as a whole. Like you're saying, it was one that we didn't expect them to bring back, but they all fit awkwardly with all the different creature types. Like,
Yeah.
not something you see it and you're like, okay, I don't know how this is going to fit all the creatures, but just like that one, I think it fits multiple different decks, even if you don't lean into the creature types, which I think is good.
Yeah, it's interesting because I liked the classes as they showed up in D&D, which was awesome. And seeing this here, for me, this is like, okay, this is not going to affect the board. That's your number one thing. It's like, will it affect the board? No, it won't. However, for just one white mana after you put in that 3 mana, you get to make a copy of any token you want and draw a card. One white mana to make a token draw, like right there. It's right there, ready to go. And so, like, that is a lot of value that you have to wait a minute for, maybe, or you can run this out on turn 4 so you can do the thing and copy, and then immediately, just trigger it and go. And that to me would be a far more sort of applicable versus like running this out on turn 3 and hoping you can get there on the following turns. No, wait until you got something to trigger it, a Novus Inspector or whatever, anything that's making anything, make a copy and go. And that is super sweet. I like this card a lot.
Yeah. There's a couple ways to like make tokens for free, either like on attack step or, at the end of your end step or something like that. So it is not impossible to get this thing to trigger on turn 3, but you're right. Paying 4 mana for a clone is fine, and that's kind of what you're doing in this with this card.
Yeah. Ruben, you'll scoot to your right just a little bit so you're more centered in the frame. Otherwise, Power Dragon, what's your number 10?
My number 10 is a big fat rabbit. It's a 4 mana. It's the Warren War Leader. So 2 colorless, white for 4/4 Rabbit Knight. And it has offspring too, so you can technically have 2 of these potentially if you have 6 mana. But we've seen versions of this before, but this one's just made for rabbits. So when you attack, you can make an additional 1/1 rabbit that's tapped and attacking, or you can give all your creatures +1/+1, which is pretty cool. Or attacking creatures you control, I should say. It does make a little bit of a difference. But this is one of those things that, look, as I was looking at the set, you start thinking about, okay, there's a lot of early 1 mana, 2 mana things, but how do you finish games, right? Like, what's your big thing if they sweep your board or whatever? Like, this is totally solid. Like, it can slowly rebuild a little army on its own. If you just need something to finish some extra damage, it just pumps up your team. And it is a big 4/4 body. So, possibly 2 bodies later in the game, which is even better when you get to attacking. So, yeah, I like this one quite a bit.
Yeah. I like anybody that comes with extra bodies, either for like when they enter the battlefield or when they attack. And this does both. This is a solid 4-drop and a solid 6-drop. Goes really good in your mono white or your green white or your, whatever you're pairing token strategies already, because if you have a Mondrak or an Anointed Procession effect in play, not only are you getting double off your offspring, you're getting double off the attack trigger as well. Not to mention if you're playing this alongside Ishin or another way to double up those effects. Even just by itself, it's a solid creature that is tough to kill, and then if you don't deal with it immediately, reminds me a lot of like Hero of Bladehold, honestly. And if you don't deal with it immediately, it just starts taking over the game by itself.
Yeah, I think the reason that this is mythic and the reason it hits that mythic status is that you don't have to attack with it. This just says whenever you attack. Your offspring will say the same thing. So just whenever you attack, you get this super cool trigger. He doesn't have to be in the fray. The guy can be standing over on the sidelines like, y'all go kill stuff. It's cool. So this just immediately hits, immediately can trigger and or affect the board and make things happen. And that's why it's so exciting, quite frankly. And I love it. It's a great example of how that offspring mechanic kind of works and shows you like, hey, pump the mana in, go wide. This is here to help you and not make you put it into harm's way while you're also getting benefit out of it. That to me is that mythic kind of difference there. All right, let's move on here to my number 10. This card is rad, and it's weird to me a little bit how, I don't know, maybe kind of undersold these days how powerful a Dark Confidant type ability is. And now we have Dark Confidant at home, and that's Dark Star Augur, which is a really cool card. But again, I feel like we're in this, man, we kind of seen these effects so often in so many different ways, we don't think of them as exciting or unique. Well, Dark Star Augur, thank you, is a black and 2 generic mana for a 2/3 rare bat warlock and has offspring of 1 black mana. You may pay an additional black as you cast it. If you do, you make, as it enters, you create a 1/1 token copy of it. It has flying. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal the top card of your library, put that card in your hand. You lose life equal to its mana value. So you're not drawing it. You don't get the shoulder bonus. You're going to lose the life no matter what. You can get 2 of these really easily. And there definitely is a kind of suicide black, go all in, gain life in some other fashion, but just do whatever you got in order to get as far ahead as you can.
I love the dangerous element of this card of just like only offspring for 1. So like if you're willing to gamble on 2 of these every upkeep, like why not? Right? Like let's just see how risky we want to play. But I did also like the fact that they made this a 2/3. I feel like usually when we get these abilities, they're on like 2/1s or 2/2s or whatever. 2/3 with flying gives you at least a little bit of extra value to get out of it that can help kind of move things along so you're not just sitting there the entire time killing yourself during your upkeep. So I like that. But yeah, the card overall is actually pretty sweet.
Yeah, for sure. For 3 mana, you get a 2/3 flyer that garners you card advantage. For 4 mana, you get 3 power worth of flyers that garner you card advantage. Oh, by the way, the top end of your deck is probably like Disciple of Aclazotz at 4 cost, right? Like that's as
well, it might be Aclazotz itself.
Or Aclazotz at 5, which
That's
also
fine.
has lifelink.
Yeah.
Like there's also ways to recoup this life loss, even if you're playing a slightly higher top end. But you're right. This is a like an early Necro style card where you're like, empty your hand on turn 3, play this, refill your hand, play everything, refill your hand, play everything. Right? This is the kind of card that is just card flow, evasion. Having that 3rd toughness is actually randomly important because a lot of the flyers in the format are 2/2s. And, if you don't want to get shocked, like they actually have to spend 2 mana on a lightning strike style effect to kill this with take out the trash or whatever they have. So I think that this card is extremely good for sure. And it triggers all of your bat synergies that want you to lose life anyway.
Yeah, I mean, look, way back in the day, the biggest tournament I ever won had a Dark Confidant in it and also had Greater Gargadon in it. So I could lose 10 life out of nowhere. But you know what? You got greatness at any cost.
At any cost.
That's
at any
right.
cost.
Yep.
That's where we're at. So let's move on here to number 9. Ruben, what you got?
I think the most I ever took from a Dark Confidant was 12 in a vintage tournament from a Blightsteel Colossus. That was pretty.
Oh, jeez.
That was heartbreaking. Yeah. So my number 9. Listen, I love me an aggro deck. The deck that you're talking about, I love an aggressive mono black strategy with like Pump Knights and things like that. The problem with that deck is that sometimes you just can't push over the finish line, right? You get them down to 5, and then you got no burn spells in your deck. You got no haste creatures in your deck. There's no way to finish them off. And nothing in your deck has haste anyway. So like you play a creature, they kill it. You play a creature, they kill it, and then you run out of gas. Well, the good news is this is a way to burn your opponent out, a finisher that is you're not upset to top deck late, but it's also a 1-drop. And oh, by the way, it's also a 3-drop because it's Iridescent Vine Lasher. Iridescent Vine Lasher is a 1 black mana, 1/2 lizard assassin with offspring of 2 generic mana, and it has landfall. Whenever a land you control enters, this creature deals 1 damage to target opponent. So the play patterns here. Turn 1, we play our 1/2. That's not the most exciting thing in the world, but every land we play also deals damage and it can't be blocked. Then we can play one on turn 3 and get 2 of this effect. So every of our sack lands, every Fabled Passage, which is now back in the format, is going to deal 2 or 4. On top of that, it is a 1-drop, but it can be played as a 3-drop. So you're only taking 1 off of your Flying Dark Confidant. You're not hurt for trying to drop your entire hand in 1 turn. And it's a lizard, so you've got some lizard synergies. And it's an assassin, and there are some assassin synergies, as we just mentioned, in the Assassin's Creed set and other places, for example, with Outlaws. So I think Iridescent Vine Lasher, for the low cost of 1 mana, it's got that 2nd toughness, which is really always scary to me. I think that this card's built to spill. I like this card.
Yeah, I have a couple of different decks I've already started testing this in, and one is that lizards, almost all of them, happen to conveniently be outlaws. So there's a lot of crossover there. Dealing that extra point of damage triggers a bunch of stuff. It obviously is the perfect card for the lizard deck that wants your opponent to lose life. But on top of that, there's a fair amount of things that return lands to the battlefield too. And you can get a lot of triggers very easy with the 1/3 elf from the previous set that returns everything from the graveyard. We have the new 6 mana Lumra, or whatever her name is. She returns everything from the graveyard. Like there's a bunch of stuff you can still play that's really, really cool alongside this that especially if you offspring this bad boy for just 3 mana, like you can kill somebody with just like 4 lands out of nowhere. Like this is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, look, I'm ready to see how many fetch lands I can fetch, and then we can both take one. And we'll just keep on doing that and see who loses first.
Yeah.
Which sounds awesome. And
We can also do like a turn 7, play this with Offspring, Scape Shift,
Mhm. I love it.
just dome them for 14.
I mean, you still got like Fabled Passage,
Yep.
the Demolition Fields, whatever. There's still a lot of options to play with that card.
Oh yeah, there's plenty of ways to put lands on the battlefield, for example, or just kind of incidentally almost. And I
Yep.
really appreciate like good, exciting, rare one-drop designs. It's really hard to do. You want something that's like not going to break the game on turn one, but it's still interesting and or exciting later in the game. And that's kind of where we're at with that. I think that's great. And this will not be the last lizard that we talk about, I assure you. Power Dragon, what's your number 9?
My number 9, this is, I think, the one in my list that is strictly what I'm looking for in Commander, especially for the +1/+1 decks. But Berkey, Long Ear of the Law. It's 4 colorless, green white, 4/4. It's a rabbit soldier, legendary, but has vigilance. So we got a lot going on this card. But when it enters, you put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, which is kind of nice because that's a rarity. But then whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it attacks, double the number of +1/+1 counters on it. So anytime you have anything that says double counters, double tokens, whatever, people are going to want it. And this is another one of those. Like there are so many ways to put counters on things right now that like you can play, I think the number's like 12 different cards, 13 different cards in your decks that actually like add an extra counter every time you do something. So it's very possible if you play this on turn 6 or even before with any type of ramp and you go to attack, like you might be adding another like 15 to 20 1/1 counters to the battlefield. Like it's kind of crazy. Like this card is really cool.
Yeah, I think this card is just super rad. One of the first cards that I believe was spoiled. Anytime you use the magical D word, it's
Yep.
double. You
Mhm.
get your mind out of the gutters because Burke is here to kick ass and make your creatures awesome.
Mhm.
You're in the meantime, you're doing green white countering things. They already have plenty of enablers for this, and
Yeah.
this is a guy right at the top of your curve, just going to come out of nowhere. And its mythicness is not just that it's sort of a 6 mana 6/6 in some ways because in the counter, it's basically like a 6 mana 8/8. As long as you can just put 2 counters on 2 things,
Mhm.
that's value on value, and then it just goes exponential from there.
Yeah. And if you have any amount of +1/+1 counters in play already, it's absurd.
Yeah.
Like already well worth it at 6 mana, but as soon as you start having any amount of synergies, it goes crazy.
Right. And so we move here to my number 9. This was a card that we had spoken about previously on the live show. Because, Shaka when the walls fell, y'all. It's a very important meme in the Star Trek universe. And I absolutely love that they held that and brought it over into Maha. It's Feathers Night. It's Feathers Night, man. Like it's Shaka when the walls. 2 black, 3 generic mana for a 6/5 mythic legendary elemental bird with flying and trample and ward of discard a card, and creatures your opponents control have base toughness 1. It's like bam, bam, uppercut. Like it's just a gigantic mixture of abilities that is just going to piss you off one way or another. It's a gigantic monster. You have to discard cards to target it, and it just makes all of your stuff lethal to the smallest pyroclasms ever. Just wipe your board. Thanks. Bye. The end.
Yeah, I think I like this a lot more in Commander than I do in 60 card. But man, because like there's stuff. What's the old legend that gives all the creatures -1/-1, right? Like that guy's
All
still out there.
creatures? Like
this is like
Like a
Ascendant Evencar?
Carevac.
Yeah,
Carevac.
Ascendant
No, Carevac.
Evencar.
Yeah.
And Evan
So
Carter's
like,
side too, I think.
yeah, that
Oh,
one's
sure.
a good one. You know, obviously you can play it with Elishnorn, giving everything -2/-2, right? Like in those scenarios, this card is pretty rough. Like, I mean, you could wipe out boards and you're the only one with anything left. Like, that's really strong. I think in standard it'd be a little tough because, you know, like we previously mentioned, Aclazotz is kind of competing for the same space and stuff. But man, in Commander, this card, this thing might end some games.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if there's any way currently in standard to like do a one-sided board wipe, but there are a bunch in Commander and in older formats. Kyrvek the Spiteful and Knight of Souls Betrayal are the two that
Yeah,
come to
that's
my
another one.
mind. Where you just play that on turn 4 and then you play Maha on turn 5, and then you're the only one with creatures in play. You know, there's a number of things that are like Pestilence style effects that would be
Yeah.
great with this. And also, even absent that last ability, 6/5 flying trample ward discard a card is already just insane. So yeah, definitely an all-star.
You know, well-timed rotation because there was in the festivities that's rotating out of standard. So
Sure.
that could have got a
Festivities.
little silly.
Do note that Cinder slash Ravager does deal 1 damage to each creature your opponent's control when it enters the battlefield. That's a red-green card.
Okay.
So that's a
Yeah,
whole
it's
thing.
So we've got a
doable.
Jund. We've got a
It's
Jund card. Sure.
doable.
Yeah, I mean it's not crazy to imagine, and some of these are also just rotating or whatever.
Yeah.
But Tectonic Hazard from LCI deals 1 damage to each opponent, each creature they control. That's your end of festivities right there. Just bye. So it's easy to combo. It's a scary card in the 100 and the 99, as it were.
Yeah.
And I would definitely build a deck or two around Old Maha. But let's move on here to number 8. Ruben, what's number 8?
Hey, my number 8 is a card that everyone knows. Everyone should know it's good, but I have not heard anyone talk about it. It's a card that is good in standard. Like, we know that it's good in standard. It's also seen play in older formats in other iterations of itself. The card that I'm talking about is a 2-mana 1/1 that when it enters, you draw a card. So Elvish Visionary's been good. Fibblethip has been good. I see no reason why Pond Prophet won't follow in the same vein and be good. Pond Prophet is a green-blue hybrid and a green-blue hybrid, so either 2 green or 2 blue or green-blue. For a 1/1 Frog Advisor, when Pond Prophet enters, draw a card. This is a staple piece of the blue-green frog bounce deck, which I think is adorable that they made bounce the keyword for the frogs. This is exactly what you want to be returning to your hand with your your 1-drop 2/2 that returns stuff or anything that'll blink effects. Pawn Prophet's great, and I'm looking forward to having 85 of these in all of my draft decks.
Yeah, you know, I'm being honest because I put together a ton of deck techs already. The frogs have been the hardest one to assemble, but I feel like if it works, this will be one of the cards it has to have, right? If you're trying to build around that mechanic, because they have so many things that are returning stuff to your hand, or you get this free card into play, or do this thing. And like, if you're just getting all that extra value, even if it's just every other turn, right? That adds up really quickly. So I think you could be onto something with this, that if that deck works out, this will definitely be one of the cards that it plays.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that kind of surprises me, if anything, is that they made it a little harder to cast than I would expect. I would expect this to be blue-green hybrid in a generic mana. Honestly.
Yeah.
In our new normal of things for kind of default pushed yada yada, it's kind of tough to cast this guy, considering all things.
Sure.
Whatever. That's a little weird to me. But ultimately, the idea that the frogs are the ones that bounce all around and bounce back to your hand, I mean, that's amazing.
That's just great.
Yeah, I mean, whoever said that first in the meeting just got the high five, let's go to lunch, because you solved it, man. You figured out the frogs.
I think to your point, maybe that's why, because they know there's going to be a ton of value coming from this. It's like, all right, let's at least slow it down a little bit
Make it a little bit more
making it
difficult.
2-colored mana.
Sure.
But that's the only thing I can think of, or at least maybe wanting to force it into certain decks versus it just showing up in random green decks or random blue decks.
There you go. So Power Dragon, what's number 8?
My number 8 is Season of Gathering. I really debated which of the seasons I was gonna cover, but this is one that is surprisingly good. I think that hasn't been getting the shine a couple of the other ones have. Because for 6 mana, you get your choice of spending 5 points worth of stuff. I don't know if we just call them paws or whatever we want to call them, but five paws
Pause.
worth of things. So you get for one, you can put a +1/+1 counter on a creature, and it gets vigilance and trample. For two, you can choose artifact or enchantment and then just destroy all of them of that type, which is cool. Or you can pay 3 paws and draw a card equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. The good thing about this is kind of all the different things green decks like to do. So you don't mind that. But I was thinking in standard, some of the mono green decks are playing an upper end of Nissa Ascended Animus, right? But a lot of times it's really just you end up using either the disenchant portion or you're trying to overrun effectively. And I was thinking, like, for 6 mana, it's a little less and you still get to get options here. And destroying everything is pretty sweet, especially in a game of Commander where you can just say, like, I'm going to destroy all artifacts and enchantments.
Yeah.
Creatures are fine. All right. You know what I mean? Like, that's pretty sweet. Or, all right, I'm going to pump these couple of guys, get some extra damage in, and then I'm going to draw like 5 cards.
Yeah.
Right. There's a lot of little value to come here. And sneakily could be a card that the raccoons want to play because you need somewhere to keep spending all this mana. So getting to 6 mana is not that difficult for that deck. And this gives you extra cards you can keep casting, so you can trigger whatever we're calling the deal 4 or cast 4 mana to expend.
Yeah.
Right. So I think there's some extra value that could be had in this card for sure.
Yeah, this is a really interesting card. I don't know if anyone else misread that second ability, but I just thought it was disenchant. And I
No.
looked back and I was like, wait a minute.
No, that's humility, or not humility, purity.
Yeah, that's
That's
pure-
all of them.
slash
Yeah.
Shatterstorm. Like, just get
It's Shatterstorm and Tranquility, your
Tranquility.
choice.
Yep.
There you go.
Yeah, there's 6 mana effects that are able to destroy all artifacts and enchantments include Bane of Progress or Austere Command. This has a similar amount of utility to it, because you could do that, or you could just pick one of them and then get a bunch of +1/+1 counters, or you can draw a bunch of cards, right? If there are no artifacts or enchantments on the board and you only have your Nissa, like you said, you can put 2 counters on it and then draw 5 cards. That's plenty worth it.
I'll tell you another sneaky thing with this for the +1/+1 counter decks is that one of the problems they have sometimes is you can get a thing with a bunch of counters that doesn't have trample.
Right.
Right. So you have this like 8/8, 10/10, whatever, just kind of sitting there. Well, this allows you to put more counters on things and still punch through. So
For sure.
yeah, it could work a few different ways.
Yeah, it almost reads like maybe at one point it didn't give him trample. And it was like, if I'm playing
Probably.
this giant 6 mana spell and I'm pumping all these guys and I still just get chump blocked to death,
Yeah.
kind of annoying, right? So let's just get in there and you don't have to tap them or nothing.
It's wild because it's like one more than overrun, right? So it's still like a mini overrun with potential upside if you want to do something else.
Oh, it's all upside. It's all upside. It's lovely. All right, so let's move on here to my number 8. Now, my number 8 is a card that is just awesome. I love the hell of this card. This was one of the first cards that they showed us when they were talking about the set. One that got a lot of people excited all by itself, and that is Mabel, Heir to Crown Flame. Mabel is sick. This girl is a rally the ranks for mice to start with, and it just goes up from there. For a white, a red, and a generic mana, she is a rare legendary mouse soldier. She's a 3/3 that other mice you control get +1/+1, and when she enters, you create Crag Flame, a legendary colorless equipment artifact token with equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance, trample, and haste, and equip of 2 generic mana. So for 5 mana, she's a 4/4 vigilance, trampling haster that also pumps all of your other mice. That's incredible. That's tons and tons of value. I think that's awesome. There's plenty of ways to make mice and things. Mice are very aggressive, so this is going to like lead the charge, and I just love it. Even if it's just for commander decks and it never gets there and constructed, I don't care. It's an awesome name. First of all, Mabel, wonderful sort of callback, old school name. Very sort of storybooky in that way. I love that kind of way that feels. And otherwise, it's just a great story. She makes a really cool sword and kicks your ass with it.
Yeah, this is just solid. I mean, 3/3 for 3. It's a solid lord to pump what's going to obviously be a popular creature type in this set.
Mm-hmm.
And you just get bonus equipment just because.
Yeah.
We'll get
Making
that.
the extra permanent is huge. Even if this is the only play you play, she's a 4/4 Vigilance Trample Haste. If it's the only thing that you're able to do on like turn 5. And if you're able to interact with it positively in some way, for example, if you have like fighter class in your deck and you're able to equip it for free, or
Mm.
some other interaction of like when you make an equipment do a thing, when you make an artifact do a thing. Oh, by the way, also a lord. So anytime you play Three Blind Mice or any of the token makers, it's going to be great. This is the face of the set. Mabel is kind of the main character of the story of this episode of Bloomburrow. So making her have a good card was necessary, and they pulled it off.
Right, and just imagine, literally every creature you draw after you play her for 2 extra mana, it's got Vigilance, Trample, and Haste.
Yep.
Like, that's amazing. Like, that's really fantastic value. And I think that is lovely, and I love that card a lot. So let's move on here to number 7. Ruben, what's number 7?
Hey, it took us 30 years to get a legendary 2-color bat.
Okay.
We've got like enough bats for a bat commander deck, but the only legendary bats we had were mono black. And now we can play all of our bats because there are some white bats and they interact favorably with the sets mechanic and how bats usually interact with life loss and life gain with Zoraline Cosmos Collar. Zoraline Cosmos Collar is a 3/3 flying vigilance for generic white black. Legendary creature Bat Cleric. So we're already 3/3 flying vigilance for 3. It's pretty good. Whenever a bat you control attacks, you gain a life. It's pretty easy to have a 1-drop or a 2-drop bat in play and get immediate value out of this. Maybe 2. And then, of course, she triggers herself. And when Zoraline enters or attacks, you can pay white-black and pay 2 life. When you do, return target non-land permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it. So 3-drop 3/3, already good. 5-drop 3/3, get a thing back immediately. That's a Sun Titan. This is a Sun Titan on a flyer. This card is very extremely good.
What I like about it is mostly the 5-mana option, right? Because you can play it, get back probably something like a Deep Cavern Bat that died early on, get rid of the next problem card. Now it also protects Zoraline in some ways. And now it's going to be a real nuisance for your opponent the rest of the way. So, like, this card, yeah, definitely gives bats a little bit of reach that I think when I was first thinking about him, wasn't sure, but as the preview season went on, but then you see this card and go, oh, there it is. Like, that's the thing.
I mean, even like where we've talked about like Essence Channeler as a 2/1 bat that whenever you gain life, you put a counter on it. This immediately follows up and snap, you got it, right? Which is fantastic. Deep Cavern Bat, already an all-star. I literally just brought up Dark Star Augur.
Yep.
Like, we want ways to gain life. We want bats that are awesome. We want bats we want to bring back to the battlefield thanks to that trigger, which is great because that means it's good early and it's good late. And that's always the hallmark of a great Magic card. It just is. And I love it. Power Dragon. What's number 7?
We're still playing through the seasons here because I had to get a couple of them in there, but we talked about this one before, and it's Season of Loss. I mean, it just fits too many different decks. It's 3 black, so 5 mana. So it's really affordable, and it's actually for black these days kind of on rate with other black sweepers, which means it probably is going to fit into even more decks. But for your 5 points worth of pause, you can spend 1 to have each player sacrifice a creature. You can spend 2 to draw a card for each creature you control that died this turn. Or you can spend 3 pause and each opponent loses X life, where X is the number of creatures in your graveyard. There's a lot of ways we can get stuff in the graveyard. There's a bunch of self-mill stuff that in multiple formats where that's a thing, but definitely a lot in standard right now. Right? We can play it alongside something where we want to sacrifice our creatures with Insidious Roots type decks, right? Because you're already putting a bunch of stuff in the graveyard. You can play stuff from there. So this is a great card for those types of decks. And then just drawing as well. Like, you have some type of Aristocrats type deck where you're sacrificing 4 effects anyway. Some Bartolome combo, whatever, right? Like, okay, cool. So I sacrifice like 4 things. I'm gonna go ahead and draw some cards and then ding you for another like 6 or 7. Like, this is actually just a cool card all around, and I have no doubt I'm gonna lose a few games to this thing.
Yeah. For my money, this is the best season of card. I think you're right in that we're usually I'm going to call them beans. If you're
Sure.
paying if you're paying 1 and 2 bean abilities, you're doing pretty good. Like if you're making your opponent sacrifice 3 creatures and then you draw a card or 2 or 3 cards, you're pretty happy about that. If you're just wiping the board and each player sacrifices 5 creatures, you're pretty happy about that. And oh, by the way, if you draw one super late in your, aristocrats strategy that has a bunch of like shambling ghasts and stuff in it, you're also just fireballing your opponent again in a mono black deck. So there's a lot of utility here. It is 5 mana for effectively a wrath, which, always pretty much always sees play. And this one has so much utility beyond that that I think that this one makes it an all-star.
Yeah, I mean this to me is like this is a commander all star. This is a fantastic commander card because each player does a thing. Each opponent loses X life. You don't have to target them, by the way.
Yeah.
Nice ley line of sanctity or whatever. It's not happening. So getting around the targeting restriction is nice. Having so many different kind of ways you can mold this into what you want to do is really cool. Like we both lose 3 creatures, but I draw 3 cards. Like that's ridiculous. And that's kind of where you're at with this card. So I think it's sweet.
I just realized something else, that it's acting potentially better than some of the sweepers because it's a sacrifice
It's a
effect for those
sacrifice,
creatures.
yeah.
It's exactly
So you
Gets
can't
around
even save them with.
indestructible.
Yeah, exactly.
right. So if you're putting in the full 5 mana, you get some really awesome effects. And if this is the last season we talk about, I'm going to just pour one out for the white one because I really like the white one. It almost made my list.
Sure.
I really like the white one. It's really dope. All right, let's move on here to number 7 for me. This is a card that we have not spoken about that I didn't really pay a lot of attention to. But I was looking around and I was trying to look at, lists of things that people like and they were talking about on their end. And I was like, damn, this card is pre-ordering for a lot of money. This is weird. And I read it and I thought about it and I was like, Evan, you've been playing Magic the Gathering since 1996. Maybe you can figure out why cards are good. I'm like, well, this card is good because it has a cost reduction mechanic on it. And any cost reduction mechanic is always scary, just flat out. And let me tell you, Rotten Mouth Viper, this is a mythic. And y'all need to be paying attention how stupid this card is, okay? So for a black and 5 generic mana, it is a 6/6 mythic elemental snake. But oh no, as an additional cost to cast it, you may sack any number of non-land permanents. This spell costs 1 generic less to cast for each permanent sacrificed this way. That's tokens, that's treasures, that's token creatures, that's blood tokens or whatever, anything you're making. And whenever Rottenmouth Viper enters or attacks, put a blight counter on it. Then for each blight counter on it, each opponent loses 4 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. So if you're running this out there, thanks to tokens and token generation or whatever, as 3 or 4 mana, it's a 6/6 giant monster that when it enters, you're getting that sweet trigger. And then every time they attack, you put that blight counter on it. And then for each blight counter, so when you attack for the first time, 2 of those triggers happen.
Yeah.
Y'all, that adds up fast. This card is scary.
Yeah, it can be played in token decks, anything with treasure, like where you have just small resources you can get rid of and you don't really care. Right? This is just so good. I mean, like, realistically, probably gonna often be cast for like 3 mana, and you're gonna get a 3 mana 6/6 that your opponent has to worry about every turn from that point forward.
Yeah. I mean, it's pretty easy to get this thing out turn 3. Any mana dork is gonna make this thing cost 2 less effectively.
Yeah.
And then you've just got a 6/6 beater that puts your opponent in a headlock for the rest of the game until they deal with it. Reminds me a lot of like a Titan, of like those 6 mana Titans, or the 6/6 Titans, because of the cost reduction. It is cheaper, or sorry, it's more expensive than it looks like, but it's cheaper than it is, if that makes sense. In that you are still paying for it, but you're never paying retail. Like no one's ever paying 6 mana for this card.
Right.
And usually the things you're sacrificing are either incidental, like food tokens, or things that you want to get rid of anyway. So things that have death triggers, or if you have blood artist style things going on, or you want to fill your graveyard. And oh, by the way, it retains its value as you keep attacking with it. It's not just the Abyss where they have to chump block it. It also keeps getting those blight counters. So it is a huge beater. It is an enormous threat by itself, and it also enables a bunch of your triggers.
Like, imagine and think about how many of those stupid one black mana return something that died this turn back to the battlefield. If you're
Sure.
sacking that mana dork and you want them back, get them back. Or you leave that one mana up because they're going to kill the Viper after that trigger resolves.
Sure.
And you'll be like, okay, cool, let's do it again. And you're like, no, because they get a whole nother blight counter. They got to kill it again. It's awesome. So that is just a whole boatload of value. And this card, I think, is going to sneak up on a lot of people and then be like, wow, I can't keep up with that giant monster of pain. So let's move on here to number 6. Ruben, what's your number 6?
My number 6 is the only higher on my list.
Okay.
It is very cool. It is very good, and I'm not surprised that it's higher.
Okay. Power Dragon, what's your number 6?
That's interesting because my number 6 is also higher on somebody's list.
There
Though
you go.
not terribly surprising that it is, honestly.
All right, all right. Well, if I gotta be the one to carry the 6, then I guess
Hey,
I will.
do it.
Look, number 6 is a super duper cool card. This is a card that I think can sneak up on a lot of people because, whenever I see a low cost creature mythic, like, the ears are perked, like, what's going on here? And when you read it, it doesn't immediately jump out like, oh, wow, that's super powerful. No. Kitsa Otterball Elite is a damn good Magic card, all right? It is a blue and a generic mana for a mythic, legendary Otter Wizard. It's a 1/3 with Vigilance and Prowess, which means whenever you cast a non-creature spell, it gets +1/+1 until end of turn. Tap : draw a card, then discard a card. 2 generic tap : copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. Activate it only if Kitsa's power is 3 or greater. Now, based on the way the triggers work, feel free to correct me here. I play a 1-mana cantrip, and she'll go to 2 power, well, she'll go to 2/4 because of prowess. Then I'll play a lightning bolt. The prowess trigger is going to be on the stack. It's going to go through. Then she's going to be a 3/5, and then you're going to pay 2 mana and tap her, and then you got 2 lightning bolts now.
Correct.
And
That's correct.
There is a blue-red wizard's deck that runs tons of tiny, cheap, cantripy things,
Yeah.
cards that increase power, and or just non-creature spells that do something to the board. And this thing is perfect for it, and I just absolutely love it. And maybe it can get there in standard, I don't know. But this is like the first thing I'm throwing in that blue-red wizard's deck, and I think it's historic, and it's going to be awesome.
You missed something very key in your explanation of how she works.
Let's do it.
You could also have been attacking at that point, so
Yeah.
she's getting extra damage in while you're doing all that other
Vigilance,
stuff.
let's go.
Yeah.
No, this is a funny card because it's one of the ones I read and kind of went, I don't know what to do with this card just yet, but I know all these words do something together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like you look at it and you're like, I know this card does something, right? Like I have to piece it together. What are the puzzle pieces around it? But when it finds a home, it's going to be doing a lot of work in whatever deck it ends up in, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that you hit the nail on the head with the blue-red wizards deck. This thing is an aggressive wizard that wants you to be casting spells. It is also a looter, which I'm a sucker for a looter. If I can get a 1/3 that draws a card and discards a card, I'm all on board. The fact that this does anything else is all gravy. So vigilance, sign me up. Has prowess, sign me up. Much less copying spells. So yeah, I think that this card, the sky's the limit. This card was very close to my list as well.
It's also an otter,
Sure.
that triggers some
Yeah.
things.
And there's the new draw 2 cards otter divination, basically.
Also, just realized we found out something about Bloomburrow in this card, and the fact that otter ball is apparently some kind of sport that otters play. I don't like what. I just realized that it's like otter ball. She's like just a badass quarterback or something. Like I don't know what this card's doing.
The fact that it's finding you more of those spells that are going to make her great, but the fact that you can just loot away extra copies in your hand, like, no, I got two Kitsas. Well, one gets out of here just with her ability. You don't gotta do nothing. It just works. Like, that's incredible. 2-mana looters anyway. We don't get anywhere near common. It's mythic, partially for a reason. And yeah, I think this thing has a lot of potential.
Yeah.
All right, so let's move on here to number 5. Now, I guess ironically, It is my only higher, but that's okay because
Hmm.
it's
There you go.
awesome. So, Ruben, what's your number 5?
They put heroic intervention in this set. I don't know if you guys heard,
Yeah.
but there's a heroic intervention in this set, and it's named Dawn's Truce. Dawn's Truce is a generic and a white instant with gift a card. You may promise an opponent a gift as you cast the spell. If you do, they draw a card before its other effects. You and permanents you control gain hexproof until the end of the turn. If the gift was promised, permanents you control also gain indestructible until the end of the turn. So this does what a heroic intervention does, which is indestructible and hexproof. However, you can also just do hexproof if, for example, you're being targeted by a discard spell or targeted by a sacrifice effect that you don't want to deal with. But if a wrath is coming your way, go ahead and draw that extra card. You're good over there. In mono white, this effect is very important. Teferi's Protection sees play at 3 mana. Heroic Intervention sees play at 2 mana, but in green, this is going to be in standard in white at 2 mana. I'd be kind of shocked if this didn't see standard play.
Yeah, I just had this on a video, which, if people want to see my 10, sleeper picks from the set, but it's definitely on that list. And part of the reason was just like, I was surprised to see this is only pre-ordering for like $4 to $5 in most places. And I didn't really understand because I was like, we've reprinted Heroic Intervention like, I don't know, 8 times or something now, and it still goes for like $10. So I'm like, how is this thing like $4? I don't get it. Like, and it gives you, like you were pointing out, the extra option of just protecting yourself from stuff, right? If you just don't want to be targeted with certain things or, target opponent, whatever, right? This card is really, really good. And for only 2 mana, I expect this is going to show up in quite a few decks. If nothing else, at least in the sideboards.
Yeah, less than $10 for the super cool like showcase version. Like, are you serious?
Yeah, I don't understand. I'm so confused.
Gift a card as an ability is a significantly better ability in Commander.
Oh yeah,
where this effect is better already.
Right.
So I anticipate this being better than Heroic Intervention in a number of circumstances.
Yeah,
like for real, I would buy some of these right now if you needed them because I can't imagine they're ever going to be cheaper than they are now.
They're never going to be cheaper than right now. I mean, this card is bananas in terms of the way it works. Like the fact that it's very political when it comes to multiplayer, but when it comes to just 1v1, like you got to recognize that when you gift that card, 40% of the time it's just a land. Like 40%, you roll your 4 on all your D10s, like it's just a land.
But even then, if you're trying to stop a no more lies or whatever, and it's just like, cool, I saved my creatures for an extra turn, that card's not even going to matter.
Right.
I'm attacking with 4 things, probably with enough to be lethal next turn.
Right. And more probably like what a Doomblade than a counterspell, but
sure.
Regardless, this effect is huge. This card is great. I agree with you. It was definitely on my short list. What is your number 5 Power Dragon?
My number 5, I mentioned it before, and I think I'm more in love with this card than I need to be, honestly. It's going to be an unhealthy relationship. This is going to be my Trash Panda Bay, if you will. But Scrap Shooter, man, it's a colorless green for a 4/4, big old body with reach. But when it enters, if you've given your opponent the gift of a card, it gets to destroy an artifact or an enchantment opponent controls. Like, this is literally a card. Like, I had to read it multiple times. I'm like, what's the downside on this guy? Right? Like, it's a big body for 3 mana. It has reach, which is huge in standard right now when you need to block like slick shots and whatever, right? But I'm just and now I guess it'll be bats and birds or whatever you're also going to want to be able to block.
Right.
So it's doing that work. And then you also get to get rid of artifacts and enchantments by giving them a card, which is fine. But more importantly, I think for both just mono green or things like raccoons, you don't have to dedicate so many cards now to those extra things that aren't creatures, right? This allows you to play more creatures in your deck while still having the utility that you want. The only downside then would be, do I just want to play it now and be super aggressive, or do I want to save it for the utility factor? But otherwise, yeah, this is just a sweet card.
Yeah. There was a conversation we had on Magic Mike's a while ago about how big could they print a 3-drop? Because we've had Leatherback Baloth as a 4/5 for green, green, green.
Yeah.
Right.
We've had Yorvo, which is a 4, like comes in with 4+1/+1 counters for green, green, green.
Yeah, we have Polukranos, who's a
We have
4/5 for 3 green.
4/5 for, yeah, exactly. There you go. Pelucranos is another good one.
Hmm.
Now we're going generic green, green for a 4/4 with upside. So, and not legendary. So there's, I mean, that's already a Rubicon we haven't gotten to before. And oh, by the way, it has reach, so it stands in front of your bats and birds, like you said. And oh, by the way, you can gift a card, and if they try to counter this, they don't get to draw the card. But if you gift the card, then you still get to destroy an artifact or an enchantment on turn 3 and make a 4/4. Like, this card is everything for everyone. 100% an amazing card.
Yeah, I love the fact that the gifting thing only works if the spell resolves.
Yeah.
Like, you can
Yep.
tell them, you can promise the gift as you cast it, but when it enters, they draw the card. So, oh, you counter, well, you don't get that ability. And
I love the tension there.
Oh, the tension is wonderful. I mean, for me, my favorite tension is that, look, you are going to look at an artifact or an enchantment across from you at the table, whether it's commander or 1v1, and you're going to say, would I rather them have a random card in their hand than that thing right there? And that's the power of this card, is you get to make that decision every single time. I'm like, well, I'm okay with you having that, whatever. But nope, that's got to go. And I get a 4/4 reach sticking around later. Like, yes.
I think a very common pattern we're going to see is something like turn 1 guy, turn 2 guy. You play something, your opponent plays like temporary lockdown, right? Gets rid of 2 or 3 of your creatures. And then you play this dumb thing.
Yeah.
Like, get rid of the lockdown. I get my board back. Sure, have an extra card. Go.
40% it's a land. 40% it's a land. That's all I'm saying. So let's move on here to number 4, and I'll go ahead and kick it off since I didn't have a number 5. And remember when I was talking about earlier, and I'm like, that ain't gonna be the last lizard we're talking about. Well, this is the one that we're talking about because he's awesome. Gev Scaled Scorch is the real deal. I think this card is absolutely ridiculous, at least for kind of what it's replacing. So for a red-black, it is a legendary lizard mercenary. Again, they're all outlaws, right? So red-black, 3/2, Ward of Pay 2 life. I'm already on board with what's happening here. Other creatures you control enter with an additional +1/+1 counter on them for each opponent who lost life this turn. And how do you trigger that? Well, whenever you cast a lizard spell, it deals 1 damage to target opponent. So you play it in your lizard deck, you get those free triggers, and those things come out. And because it's triggered, and whenever you cast the spell, it's going to enter with the let's go. I want this right now. I love this. This is what I'm talking about. This will be a gigantic player in standard, in my opinion. If there's anything red-black in it, I have a feeling it's going to be in there.
Okay, so hear me out. Like, Gev, great. I think if you're playing lizards, this is a card you have to play. Even being legendary, I think you play 4 of them. But again, I was going back through some old cards and realized that there's some other lizards that already existed, and one of them is Hellspur Posse Boss, which is awesome with this guy. Because you get a 2/4, which is going to be a 3/5, right?
Guy.
And you get 2 other 1/1s that are going to be 2/2s. And this dude is just giving them all haste. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah. I might have played a vanilla 3/2 for 2 if it was a lizard in the lizard deck. Vanilla.
Yeah.
Ward Pay 2 life, other creatures get bigger. Whenever you cast a spell, do direct damage. On top of all of that, this card's insane.
Yeah, Blood Tithe Harvester has ruled the roost, and the red-black, 2 mana, 3/2 creature that does awesome stuff. And this is a good replacement. This does tons.
They
of
do
cool
two
stuff.
very different things, but yes, I mean, this is certainly on the level with Blood Tithe Harvester.
And honestly, I want them to do very different things because we played with Blood Tithe Harvester. We get it. Like, we understand how that card's good. So let's try something different with different play patterns. Ruben, what's number 4?
My number 4 is another gift a card card. I have a type, and I think that they really did an interesting thing with gift a card. And I think that the card that I'm most interested in with this ability, because of the way that it's worded and the way that it resolves, is Cruel Claws Heist. Cruel Claws Heist is black for a rare sorcery with gift a card. You may promise an opponent a gift as you cast this spell. If you do, they draw a card, Before its other effects,
Mm-hmm.
Cruel Claw's Heist says target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it. Exile that card. If the gift was promised, you may cast that card for as long as it remains exiled, and mana of any type can be spent to cast it. So it's already a 2 mana targeted discard, which we've seen be good in the past. Things like Thought Erasure. If you go way back in time, something like Addle. That is a card that sees play sometimes, depending on what else you can do. But you're really playing this to gift it. And because your opponent draws the card first, you're actually looking at an additional card and still taking the best thing and getting access to it later. Oh, by the way, this isn't a dead card when your opponent is hellbent late, because you can gift the top card of their library to them and then take that. So there's really interesting stuff to do with Cruel Claw's Heist. I'm very interested in this.
Yeah, I like this card quite a bit. Honestly, I think mono black discard decks are going to be a real thing. I think we're already seeing people talk about them a little bit. And this card could definitely fit in there. I don't know if you want 3 or if you want 4, but either way, like this card's definitely going to be part of that. It's
I,
really cool.
I think I want 4. I think
Yeah.
I'm up for this like Thoughtseize plus plus. Like, it's Thoughtseize for 2 mana, sure, whatever. But that really gorgeous, like you draw a card, and if it's
Mm-hmm.
something ridiculous, if it's what you've been waiting for, it's that combo piece so and so, I get to yoink it and play it later as much as I want to, as it
Right.
were. That's just beautiful. And the top deck of the fact that Thoughtseize kind of sucks is when they're hellbent. You're like, oh, this does nothing. Well, that's not
Yeah.
true. Now you say you pay 2 mana, you gift a card. Oh, you got a land. Well, whoop-de, right? But if you got something good, well, it's coming over here, and it's late in the game, you get to play it. This card is great.
Yeah.
I love it. All right. Power Dragon, what's number 4?
My number 4 is another talent. This time we're going with Innkeeper's talent. So a colorless and a green. At the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. Because we already know +1/+1 counter stuff is already really big and really popular. But for 1 green mana, you go to level 2 and permanents you control with a counter on them have ward 1. So now damn near everything you play for the rest of the game is going to be hard to kill. It's going to basically cost your opponent more mana to get rid of your stuff. But then you can pay 4 and go to level 3. And then if you put 1 or more counters on a permanent you control, you put twice that many counters on it. It's more the same wording, right? Like, I mean,
Yeah.
like this, this is a pattern that when you see these words together, these cards tend to do things. But this is cool just because you have a thing that's going to put a counter guaranteed every turn, right? Cards that do that tend to be popular. This is very low investment. And then you get the upside of now all your stuff's harder to kill. And then you get an even further upside of now it's 2 counters minimum of turn that you're putting out on things, which is really sweet. So yeah, I expect this to find a home in quite a few different builds.
This does have the doubling season phrasing also, by the way.
Mhm.
So, instead of being 5 mana, it is ultimately 7 mana, but you do get to double loyalty counters, you get to double experience counters, all of that kind of stuff. And you get to pay it at the rate that you want to. You can put it on layaway. At the beginning of combat on your turn is also a very low bar. Goes really good in your +1/+1 counters decks that you already have. Like if you're playing anything with a hardened scales in your commander deck, if you're playing anything that gets bonuses for its power, there's a new card in this set that's a red 1-drop that says when it dies, deal damage equal to its power to a thing.
Oh yeah.
And then you can play this on turn 2 and immediately make that a 2/2. So there, you don't really even need to level it up past level 1 to make it worth it. And then every level has value associated.
I didn't even think about your interaction, but that actually makes that card a 3/3.
Oh, yes.
Because it gets 1 from itself, then it gets the actual counter because you targeted it or whatever. And
Yep.
yeah, so that's a little something. I hadn't thought about that.
I mean, it doesn't get into the red zone, but Luminarch Aspirant was an all-star for as long as it could have been played. It was played, and it was great. So that's already passing that bar.
I would rather have Luminarch Aspirant be an enchantment in many circumstances.
Well, yeah, that's true
So,
too.
It's true.
There's many times it died before you got to put that counter on something.
Yep.
Yep, it would put that trigger there right for you. Now look, not only does it double things like the Planeswalker loyalty or whatever, it doubles for your blight counters on your Rotten Mouth Viper.
Hey, there we go.
Oh, hey, oh.
I mean,
Perfect.
look, this to me on running on turn 3 and bump it, running on turn 4 and ultimate it, and then you're adding +2, +1/+1 counters immediately at that point. So anything you played on the first turn, whatever your super cool 1-drop was, it's awesome
Right.
now.
Yep.
And I just think that's great. This card is super cool and exciting, and I love the design of it. All right, let's move on here to number 3. Boopity boop. Ruben, what's number 3?
My number 3 is a card that I love because I love my consistent play patterns. And when I am playing a deck, I like to have it do the thing that I want it to do consistently. And one of the decks I really like is like a red-green ramp strategy. And I really want my consistent mana growth. Traditionally, that growth goes 2-drop, 4-drop, and then I start playing 6s and more, right? So I want to play my Rampant Growth on 2. I want to play my Solemn Simulacrum on 3, and play my or on 4, and play my Primeval Titan on 6, right? That's the pattern we're looking for. We've got a lot of great 2-drops that add a mana in this set. We don't really have any 4-drops that add a mana in this set, but we do have a 2-drop that has Offspring that could also add mana. And that card is, of course, Tender Wild Guide.
Yep.
Tender Wild Guide is a generic and a green for a 2/2 Possum Druid with Offspring of 2 generic mana. So you could either spend the 2 mana for the 2/2 or 4 total mana for a 2/2 and a 1/1. Both of those creatures have both of these abilities. Tap, add 1 mana of any color, and tap, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. So you're able to go 2 and 4 and 6, and it doesn't become irrelevant in the late game. Like, you can actually grow this thing later and get some +1/+1 counter synergies, or just have slightly bigger creatures going forward. Tender Wild Guide, I think, is excellent and fits exactly where you want it to.
Yeah, this is an interesting card because they didn't make it fit any of the creature themes of the set because it's a possum. You know, I don't even know. I think we have just a couple of possums in Magic River, which is kind of cool. But this card really does have a lot of extra value. Again, if you're doing the +1/+1 counter thing, like, that's cool. If you just need to ramp, it's a good early 2-drop. Or if you just want more bodies, right? Whether you want tokens or whatever, it's doing that. So it can fit a couple of different builds for very low investment with a reasonable upside on this. Like, this is a pretty cool card.
Yeah, I think this card is rad. Like the fact that, like, I think on a long enough timeline, every kind of property or idea gets to Muppet Babies. Like, eventually you're going to. But the idea that you can have these kind of make their babies, the token is the baby, which also has the mana cost. I'm not really sure if it matters if that mana cost, but who cares?
Sure.
Because it's making little baby Tender Wild Guide to little friends. They're making little
Dude,
friends.
even in the artwork, the little one looks like the angry one.
Yeah, like, let's go. Let's freaking go. That card is awesome. This is just where that sort of staple 2 mana awesome mana dork. Like, we've had them for years and years now, and I appreciate the different ways that they kind of make them interesting and make them really unique. And making 2 of these late is great.
And especially since we have expend mostly at 4, we've got 5, I think, 2-drops that can let you play a 4-drop on turn 3 in the set. They aren't all spectacular. They aren't all, I mean, most of them have some sort of condition. Either they are weak, or you have to attack with it, or do something along those lines. But there's a number of ways that you can get there. And this one additionally has counter synergies, has +1, has token synergies, does a lot more.
There you go. All right, this card is dope. Let's move on to Power Dragons number 3. What you got?
I wouldn't be surprised if this number 3 was one of the ones higher on y'all's list, but Biza, the Bounding Spring. She's 2 colorless, white for a 4/5 elemental elf. And I think when I was going through the set, this was the actual first creature I looked at and went, what is this card? Because it literally does everything. Like, we say a card does everything, but this literally does. So when it enters, Create a treasure token if an opponent has more lands than you. You gain 4 life if the opponent has more life than you. You make 2 1/1 blue fish if the opponent has more creatures, and you draw a card if the opponent has more cards than you. You're going to get some combination of these every time. First off, it's a 4/5 for 4, which, all right, solid, whatever. But you're most likely getting at least 2 of these. So some combination of a treasure, a card, some life, or 2 tokens to go along with your 4/5 for 4 mana. Like, there's nothing to dislike about this card at all.
Look,
Yeah.
I need the bucket list check of getting every one of those triggers. You know what
Sure.
I mean? I need the experience of every single one of those triggers happening. Yes, please. Gain life, draw
Somebody's
cards,
gonna
make
have it.
tokens.
Yeah. I don't know how hard it is actually. Especially if you're playing in a format that has access to Solitude, for example. You can empty your hand pretty quick. And if you're up against an aggro deck that, deals you a lot of damage, puts a bunch of creatures in play, it's eminently reasonable to trigger all 4 of these. I've rarely seen a card that I want to cloud shift or blink more. 4/5 for 4 mana, even if you're triggering nothing, is above rate. And if you get any amount of value out of this, you're home free.
I appreciate the fact that if I trigger nothing, I am ahead in every aspect.
Exactly. That's the other part of this. Because that was my thought of like, well, if I get nothing, I guess I'm winning already, right?
Right.
Like, I mean, like, I already have more of everything. So,
Right. If none of these trigger, you win the game. Like, thank you. I didn't need that.
and the wild part is, I was honestly thinking like this could just be the upper end for like mono white aggro,
yeah.
right? Like, just all right, later in the game, I get some life or I get a couple of cards because I emptied
Right.
my hand or whatever the case may be. Like, this can fit a lot of decks for who knows
sure.
what reasons.
Well,
It just
against
goes into a lot of
against control after they wrath you, you're going to play this, draw a card, and get a treasure, probably.
Probably.
Against
most
aggro,
likely.
you're going to gain 4 life and make 2 fish, most likely. And then, like, you'll also have a 4/5. So we're in good shape.
Yeah, bring it on, mono red players. I'm tired of the crap and best of 1 queues. And this is the card to stop all that nonsense. And I love it, and I'm glad you included it here. For my number 3, this is a card that I just have a feeling I'm going to get to see it a lot, and I'm not going to necessarily enjoy playing against it per se. It's a card I'm glad exists, but it's not a card I know if I want to be against. The Sunspine Lynx showed up.
That was my number 6.
That was my number 6.
Oh, wow.
Oh, that's the same slot even. Wow.
The same slot. Well, goodness. Well, I bumped it up a little higher in the list because this card's a little silly.
Yeah.
For 2 red, 2 generic mana, it's a 5/4, first of all, 4 mana 5/4. It's a rare elemental cat that says players can't gain life, damage can't be prevented, and when it enters, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. We finally have the stopgap solution to everyone's just playing every dual land they possibly can. Doesn't matter, just throw a Mirrex in it for funsies. Sure. No. Now there's actual scariness. The mana cost, the damage it can deal is real. Damage can't be prevented, so no shenanigans there with protection or whatever. And yeah, I'm kind of scared of this card.
Yeah,
I like that they put it on a 4 mana thing. So like you have to decide that this is where my deck is going, right?
Yeah.
I don't know if like the hyper aggressive mono red aggro we've been seeing would play this because they're not trying to play 4 mana things. But there are worlds where maybe they sideboard this, or the Gruul aggro decks, or the Rakdos aggro stuff might want something like this, right? Or even the mid-rangey decks might want it. It's a big 4/5 or 5/4 body
5/4.
still. I mean, like you could still just fight with it and get some incremental, 3, 4, 5 damage on it potentially. So yeah, this card is doing a lot of different things and probably going to show up more than I care to see it. So we're going to have to learn to be good with those mana bases.
Yeah. Nice Beza that you have over there. I have a 5/4 and I'll attack into it. And oh, by the way, you won't gain any life after I've already dealt you a bunch of damage. Players can't gain life is a huge statement. Price to progress on and enters the battlefield effect is enormous. It's also an elemental, and there is an elementals deck in Modern. So it is possible that could go in that direction as well.
Yeah, I have a feeling that this might have started as a 4/4, and just wasn't quite as scary. But as a 4 turn clock to kill you, it's a 4 turn clock to kill you now.
Yeah.
And that's a lot scarier than five. All right, so I'm glad that we all agree that that card is dope. Let's move
Yep.
on here to number two. I'm gonna go ahead and throw out my number two here because it is a card we have spoken about on the live show before. It's still one of my favorite cards in the set. I still think it is fantastic, and we even made a little short about it because Fountain Port is the real deal. Fountain Port is fantastic. It makes me very happy that it exists. It does a lot of amazing things, and I expect that anyone listening to this is going to have some amount of them in decks that they play because it does so much. Fountain Port is a rare land that taps to add a colorless mana, a wingding, 2 generic tap, sack a token, draw a card. 3 generic tap, pay 1 life, create a 1/1 blue fish creature token, or 4 generic tap, create a treasure token. It slices, it dices, it juliennes your fries. This card is fantastic.
I like it a lot, but I do want to make a plea to the listeners or viewers. This does not go into literally every deck, right? I mean, I've already had
Sure.
decks posted where people are like, you should play a Fountain Port. I'm like, the deck only plays 21 lands. Like it
Yeah.
needs all of its colored mana. You
But
can't
Fountain Port.
we're
Right.
not trying to play long games where we have off turn spending 2 or 3 mana, right?
Yeah.
But a lot of decks do want this. I think anything in the mid-rangey space or even control decks could potentially just use a slot for this to just slowly get blockers or get an extra card. Obviously, tons of commander stuff can use this for a variety of reasons. Like I expect this won't be a $2 or $3 card for very long, honestly.
Yeah. I think in standard, this is squarely in the control decks. It's just a great utility land that does everything. It can draw cards, it can make a 1/1, it like does a bunch of stuff you want to do. In Commander, this thing shines exponentially more. Goes in every deck that you want, to any amount of tokens in, whether you're doubling your tokens or you just want value. Plus, it can pay a life, so you get it for your bat synergies or whatever you might have on those lines.
Yeah, cards great coming and going, and that's what I
Yeah.
like about it. Not the greatest land of all time; it's just a tribute. Let's move on here to number two. Ruben, what's number two?
RIP to Tenacious D for right now, at least. My number two, speaking of how ridiculous lizards are, Lizard Aggro, I think, might be the deck that we're building out of our top 10. My number two is a Lizard Aggro card. It's the second one on my list. We've talked about a lot of them thus far, and it's Hired Claw. Hired
Oh,
Claw
yeah.
is a 1 red mana.
Mm,
Is this an uncommon? No, this is a rare.
it's a rare.
Yeah,
Yeah.
one mana, 1/2 rare, lizard mercenary. Whenever you attack with one or more lizards, Hired Claw deals 1 damage to target opponent, and pay a generic and a red colon, put a +1/+1 counter on Hired Claw, activate only if an opponent lost life this turn, and only once each turn. So kind of has that Root Walla style pump ability, but can also just like keep growing. And it's a great way to sink extra mana in your low cost aggro deck. There's a number of ways to trigger this early. For example, if you have the other 1-drop that I talked about earlier and you just landfall and make them lose a life, you can pump before combat. If you have a Gez in play, this will deal 1 damage and you can pump it before combat. So this is a ton of value in a 1-drop that I would be surprised if a lizard aggro deck did not make its way into standard.
Yeah, I think Lizards also got a little bit of extra leg up on some things, having multiple 1/2 1 mana
Yes.
creatures, right?
Yeah.
Not just 1/1s or 2/1s. Like that makes a pretty big difference. And when you're talking about a deck that just wants you to literally just nick your opponent to death, this is definitely one of the cards you want because it's one more thing that even if you just attack with one thing, by the end of the turn, your opponent might have still taken 3-4 damage and blots the attacking creature. You know what I mean? Like that's how annoying the lizards are going to be.
Yeah, I mean the fact that on turn three, you play Gev, and then turn three you play this, pay another 2 mana, and suddenly it's a 2/3 for 3 mana, and it'll be 3/4 when you attack next turn with for 2 more extra mana. That's great. And when you look through some of your options that they've given you, like Cindering Cutthroat being a 3 mana 4/3, you can give Menace to, for example. Just lots of really cool options. I mean, Laughing Jasper Flint
Yep.
Yep.
show up in OTJ that is a lizard
He's in my
rogue.
build.
Absolutely. So let's get this party started. And yeah, if lizard aggro is the way to go, then let's do it. I love this card a lot.
Yeah, the Gev plus Hired Claw is effectively the Wario and Waluigi of like Soul Warden Ajani's Pridemate, where
Nice.
instead of them growing each other when you gain life, they grow each other when you damage your opponent, which is even like somehow scarier, right? Even though it's a little bit slower, I think, than the Ajani's Pridemate kind of growth pattern. That's a
Right.
lot easier to get bigger faster. But the fact that Gev and Hire's Claw kind of grow together makes it even more frightening.
There you go. So Power Dragon, what's your number 2?
My number 2 is just a big boy. And apparently he likes Hugs so much, that's what he goes by. So Hugs Grizzly Guardian.
My number 5.
So just on its face, it's 2 red, 2 green for a 5/5 trampler that lets you play an extra land every turn for God knows what reason. But when you cast it, you can spend extra mana to get to exile that many cards, and then you have access to those until the end of the next turn. So you don't even have to spend them then. This is a great early card if you just want a big 5/5 attacker, or to ramp yourself up if you're playing that type of deck. Or late game, it's a great top deck because you're like, well, I got this 5/5 and 3 more cards waiting on you. Which really puts the pressure on the opponent because then it's like, well, do I deal with this 5/5 or these 3 things I can see coming? Like this card is going to be rough to go up against sometimes. Like this is a fun card.
This card is bananas.
Yeah, I mean, 5/5 for 4 that lets you play an extra land and has trample is already worth it. Expend is usually at 4 and 8.
Mm-hmm.
So being a 4-drop that has you can do a bunch of mana into X is huge. It's only X. It's only X. It's not double X, right?
Yep.
You have red, red, green, green, but it's only X once. So paying 5 mana gets you a card.
Yeah.
Which I think is plenty good value already. Much less
the best
if you
part
pay
is
8.
If some of those are not actual spells, you just get to put an extra land into play.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
For
Yeah.
no reason at all. Like just because.
Right. You play what is it? The Tender Wild Guide.
Yep.
And then you play a land and you play this for 5 and you show a land on top and you get to play that land. This card is like everything. It's the enabler and the payoff all in the same card.
Yep.
It's also Sphinx's Revelation in that Hugs finds more hugs.
Yeah, Hugs finds hugs.
Oh,
y'all.
yeah, I guess so.
Hugs
Yeah.
will 1000% find more hugs. He'll play more lands because when the new one comes in, you can play an additional land because the first one does counter. Oh my God. This card is ridiculous. It was number 5 on my list for a reason.
Yeah.
I think it was previewed almost too early for people to recognize how stupidly crazy good this mythic is. Like,
yeah, I agree.
wild.
I think it was one of the cards, and the way I described it on my channel was like, it's only slightly what I would call underrated because people weren't talking about it. And slowly but surely, I think people are coming around on this card of just like, wait, it does what again? Wait, I didn't see the line about playing extra lands. Like, hold on a second. Like this does what?
This
card's cool.
The only way they could hold this card back was making it 2 red and 2 green. That was it. That's as far as they went. Otherwise, it's literally all upside. It's 1000% upside. It's go find more hugs. It's late game. Just keep rolling through your deck as much mana as you can churn. That's crazy. This is because back in our day, 10, 12 years ago, you didn't get that like X ability. You just got everything else. You're like, oh,
yeah, you'd pay 4 mana, get a 5/5.
Yeah.
Halftime didn't even come with trample. I mean, like you just had a sizable body for 4 mana.
You'd have to use Wolf Run, whatever it was, Wolf Run something.
Yeah,
to give it that trample. But yeah, this card is
Kessig Wolf Run.
Kessig Wolf Run. Thank you so much. This card is just silly. I want y'all to recognize that when you see this across from you many, many times, we told you so, because this card's dumb. Let's move on here to our number 1 pick. Ruben, what's your number 1?
My number 1 is a card that has a sentence on it that is crazy for the cost that we will see in Standard, and I don't think we've really seen in Standard in a long time, and that is 2 blue mana, counter target spell. That's it. Like it isn't just counterspell. It isn't, there is a downside to it. But it's not counter target spell if you pay, unless they pay two. It's not counter target creature spell. There's not any qualifier to it. Your choice to counter target spell exists on Long River's Pull. Long River's Pull is blue, blue, uncommon instant, gift a card. If you promise a card to an opponent, they draw a card before the other effects. Counter target creature spell. If this gift was promised, counter target spell instead. So, for just 2 mana, you have a Remove Soul or an Essence Scatter, which sometimes that's good enough. In limited, that'll be good enough. But if you really need to counter a non-creature spell, like a Cyclonic Rift in Commander, or a Wrath in Standard, or some giant Planeswalker, then you can give them a card. Very similar to Dream Fracture or Arcane Denial, for those of you that have played those styles of cards in the past. But for 2 mana, it's your choice if you want to counter target spell. And I don't remember the last time we had that in Standard.
Yeah, I think the Haughty Gen decks we've been seeing are going to love this type of card. I mean, just straight up the option to counter whatever. Like, in some cases, giving them the card will be a slight downside, but it's a gamble, right? You're stopping a thing you know is a problem, and then just like, cool, maybe you get something, maybe you don't. But being able to stop it at all for 2 mana, like, that's just cool. Like, still, and I agree with you, like, it definitely worse than straight up counter spell, but not by a whole lot.
Yeah, it's a card that I've seen some who've sort of not liked it say things like, "Well, you're not sort of gaining tempo," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, but again,
I mean, you are.
40% of the time they draw a land, so
But you
you're
stopped your opponent's hugs.
yeah,
Like, you know what I mean?
yeah, you made them cut that crap out, and that's
Right.
that's important.
And oh, by the way, just like every other gift card
Mhm.
in Commander, this is even better because you can counter the spell from player one
Yep.
and let player two draw the card.
Exactly. Like, who gets the card? Okay, you'll get the card, and we'll stop this thing from messing up our game or letting so and so get way too ahead.
Right.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. And for me, I think about it in constructed terms, and I'm like, I don't. It's weird. It's a weird card because a lot of times in blue white control, I don't care. I just stopped your best thing. I stopped your thing that I couldn't wrath or I couldn't answer immediately. I would much rather you have a random card than have to deal with that. Cool.
Well,
That's
a
power.
lot of those decks almost had to choose, do I want Essence Scatter or do I want some other negate or whatever?
Right.
Right now you get both of those in one, and now you can kind of trim some spots for other things. And that's huge, especially when we're talking about like the seasons and some of these other cards we've been talking about that you definitely want to stop when they're about to go off. So like this will definitely show up somewhere. I can't imagine this card doesn't get played.
Yeah, I mean, I think the fact that, a lot of times what blue white's stopping is creatures. And if it's
Sure.
just an essence scatter for harder to cast mana, that's okay. But that option is what makes
Hmm.
it really, really powerful. Power Dragon, what's number one?
Well, on brand, it's a dragon. It's the only dragon we have in the set.
Mm.
Like, but Dragon Hawk, Fate's Tempest. So 3 colorless, red, red, 5/5, oddly bird dragon.
Yep.
I thought that was very interesting because it doesn't even fit with the bird colors in the set, but it's what it is. But it's a 5/5 flyer, and it has a very kind of different ability we haven't seen before. So when it enters or attacks, you exile the top X card of your library, where X is the number of creatures you control with power 4 or greater. So realistically, probably just going to be 2 cards, maybe. But you may play those cards until your next end step. So the coming end step. But at the beginning of your next end step, it deals 2 damage to each opponent for each of those cards that are still exiled. So if you don't use them, it's just damage, right? So I get a 5/5, probably dealing another 4, luckily maybe 6, because we have scrap shooters and stuff now. So who knows what the hell. So like you're gonna deal 6 damage maybe. And then when you attack, we get to do it again, but now we have mana up that we can play those cards. But whatever we don't use, have some extra damage. Right? Maybe I don't want to play these land, take 2 for each of them or whatever. Right? This is the interesting thing to me is I was trying to compare how does this feel compared to Bonehorde Dracosaur, right? Because they're kind of similar in a way of like Dracosaur guarantees you get 2 cards every turn and possibly other resources. and you don't have to attack to trigger it, and it has first strike. But this also gets to deal damage for those cards, even if you get junk, right? Like if you brick and you just have lands, that's still damage that happens. So yeah, this card's actually pretty cool. I don't know if it being a bird matters at all, but it is just a sweet card.
Yeah.
As I
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, as I recall from the Vision document, this is the only dragon in the set and was included because we're going to Tarkir at the end of next year. And it was included like for story reasons of some sort,
Yes.
which is cool. And Bonehorde Dragosaur has to live. That's the problem with that card.
Mhm.
It has to live all the way to your next upkeep. And in multiplayer, that's a million years. And in 1v1, it still feels like a long time because they get to untap, they get all these options, they get to think about it, how they want to act to, and react to it. This, when it enters the battlefield, you're getting those triggers, you're shocking them to the face. If you're not playing those cards, it exiled land, whatever, take two, you're sort of in that sort of Chandra territory, the 4-mana Chandra territory.
Yeah.
And it just kind of exponentially goes from there. I think there's a reason this is legendary, for example. I don't necessarily want to have two on the battlefield against me at any one time. Scares me to death. And you can't make clones easily, for example, for the same way. But again, enters or attacks, awesome trigger. Amazing if you get to untap with it, let alone if you just get to resolve it. I'm on board.
Pretty easy to get a 4-power creature into play on turn 3 and another one on turn 4 and follow it up with this and just dome your opponent for 6, which is effectively haste on your 5/5 flyer, which is, better than retail. If you play this late, sometimes you'll get, I think that you're averaging 4 a lot of the time. It also just deals 2 damage by itself, gives you some options in other parts of the game. I'm excited by the fact that this is also foreshadowing the Dragon arc, as opposed to like the Eldrazi arc or the Nicol Bolas arc. I think that the Tarkir dragons are what is coming and what is the big story that is coming. People were saying that this might have been Kolagon when they first saw the art, because it does have the 4 wings, like the Kolagon style dragons have, like Thunderbreak Regent. But this is just another of those. I love this card. I think it's great. The fact that it's a bird means that you can, I guess, splash it in your bird deck and get some of those bird synergies. Or it's just a 5/5 flyer, and that's going to be real tough to beat.
And I'll take it. All right. So for my number one, I thought about this, for me, at least, sort of going forward, the way I like to think about sets and things moving, on that timeline of Magic cards being created. I'm like, all right, when we look back through history and we look at Bloomburrow, I'm like, what is one card that we will always talk about? No matter what happens, the sick reprint we always want to see show up ever since this set came to be. And I can't think of anything better than 3 Tree City. This card is already pre-ordered for well over $35. And here we are. And thank God it's not Mythic. Seriously, I'm very glad this isn't Mythic, because this card is bananas. It's amazing. It's a weird Nykthosy, Gaia's Cradle-y type card. It's cool. It's fun. It's going to go into all of your Typal decks. I love it. 3 Tree City is a rare legendary land. And as it enters, you choose a creature type. You tap to add a colorless mana, or for 2 generic tap : choose a color, add an amount of mana of that color equal to the number of creatures you control of the chosen type. This thing was spoiled, unfortunately, very early, but I think also for a reason. This is the type of card that if you read all those words, you go, Jesus Christ, that card's going to be incredible. And I think it is. And it's really neat and it's really cool. I don't think it's overpowered by any means. I just think it's exciting and fun and interesting and really just kind of just sets the plane of Bloomburrow up. And it's a card I can see us, calling back to 5 years, 10 years from now. 3 Tree City will always be awesome.
Yeah, this was an interesting one because as more stuff got previewed, I was kind of like, well, the other decks are wanting to go fast, right? So we don't really want to be playing this early, because of the colorless thing. But then when you start thinking about the applications in Commander,
yeah,
then you're kind of off the rails a little bit. And the cool part is, if you already maybe can't afford a Gaia's Cradle because they've gotten stupid expensive, this is like Gaia's Cradle at home if you're playing a theme deck, right? It's pretty good. It's not the same, but it's close. It's damn close, especially if you're playing like a token deck or something like that that's making a bunch of similar tokens. Like, there's some really cool stuff you can do with this. So yeah, not a surprise that this is going for a lot of money here in the early going of the set.
Yeah, I think that this thing really shines in decks that actually have trouble getting big mana or have issues getting another color of mana. So, to my mind, Squirrels is probably the best card for Three Tree City because the squirrels themselves aren't like elves, right? They don't make their own mana.
Yeah, yeah.
But getting a bunch of black mana to be able to support your green squirrels so that you can then pay all your Chatterfangs triggers and play like a Meat Hook Massacre or something like that is a huge deal. If you're playing like a soldiers deck that's making a bunch of tokens and you want to play your Captain of the Watch, this is another application for that. And also, I think it's worth mentioning that this is probably, I think, probably best in a rats deck, particularly the rat colony decks, because you want to have
Mm,
so much mana in those
yeah.
decks. And Marrow-Nar is very commonly the captain of that deck, the commander of that deck, and you just make a gazillion rat tokens in that deck. Being able to make a bunch of black mana for something like a Torment of Hailfire or a Meat Hook Massacre or a Maga Trader to Mortals or something like that is a huge deal.
Oh yeah, if you're playing a creature deck, a theme deck that has a way to use that mana,
Yeah.
like you're saying, whether it's to draw cards or make extra tokens or pump your team up multiple times, like whatever it is, like yeah, then this really is going to shine serious in those builds.
Look, all I'm saying is I've played against goblins, all right?
Yeah,
And
goblins also
they need a
for sure.
Yeah.
Muxus and they need a Siege Gang Commander with all the mana you need to activate it a bunch of times. They can dump their hands, make tons of goblin tokens, go absolutely bananas. And this is the type of card that can just come behind it and be like, all right, here's all the mana you need ever. And just go completely nuts.
Yeah.
And I think that's fantastic. And that was our top 10 Bloomburrow cards. You'll see them on screen right now for your review. Take a look at my list, Power Dragon's list, Ruben's top 10, and we want to hear from you about what card we didn't talk about, and we'll select our favorite to highlight in our next top 10. But before we go, I want to thank my two co-hosts. Thank you, Power Dragon.
Hey, as always, good to be here, but I got to go get back in my burrow and knock out some more Bloomburrow content.
Yeah, it's coming tomorrow. Thank you, Ruben.
Hey guys, we'll be flying above the friendly skies for the streamer event. But until then, thanks for tuning in. I love Bloomburrow. I think it's great, and I'm excited that the fans are excited about it, and I can't wait to play.
Yeah, this looks like a really, really fun set, and I think they did a really good job with it. So we'll move on here to our final slide. I want to thank our sponsor, CoolStuffInc.com. Use the promo code MagicMikes on that site. Our co-sponsor, ManaTraders.com. My co-host, Power Dragon and Ruben Bressler. You guys for watching and listening, and hope you support us at Patreon.com/MagicMikes. Follow, like, tweet, favorite, share, subscribe to everything social that tells people we exist. Catch us online at twitch.tv at Magic Mikes, on Twitter at Magic Mikes Cast, our Magic Mikes subreddit, and like the Magic Mikes page on Facebook. Also, check us out on TikTok at Magic Mikes Cast, or join us here next week, same time, same place, for another episode of Magic Mikes. Good night, everybody.